My name is Delphine Marchetti, and I'm 35 years old. I play cello for a living. 300 guests were watching when my mother-in-law lifted her champagne and called me the girl who saw strings for tips. The whole ballroom laughed. Then she handed my sister-in-law a leather folder and announced that Camille, the family's true genius, would inherit the foundation. I didn't argue. I'd written nearly every piece that foundation was famous for, in the dark, with Camille's name printed on top. What none of them knew was that the legendary conductor they'd flown in to bless the evening had recorded 4 of those works. With me, in a studio. He was already walking toward the microphone. In 90 seconds, every donor in that room would learn whose hands actually built the Ashford name. Do me a favor before we start. If a quiet person in your life ever carried more than anyone knew, comment, begin, and subscribe. I married into the Ashford name on a Saturday in June, 7 years ago, in a garden behind a stone chapel in Litchfield County. I wore my grandmother's pearls. Julian cried during his vows, and I remember thinking that a man who cries in front of 300 people is a man who will never let his mother make me disappear.
I was wrong about that.
But not yet. At the reception, Vivian Ashford took my hand in both of hers, the way you'd hold something you were deciding whether to keep. So you're the cellist, she said, and smiled with her mouth only. Julian tells me you play in restaurants sometimes. For extra money. I told her I was principal cello with a Philharmonic. That restaurant work had been a student job a decade earlier. She patted my hand.
Well,
it's all music, isn't it? Behind her, a string quartet I had personally hired was playing for, and she didn't once look at them. That was the sentence that decided everything. Not the words. The pat on the hand. 7 years is a long time to let one sentence set the terms of a marriage. I told myself I was being gracious. I told myself old money families take time. What I actually did was disappear into the work and let the work speak for me, except it never got the chance, because everything I wrote quietly became something Camille announced loudly. By year 3, I was writing string arrangements for the Foundation's spring concerts under a line that said, arranged by the Ashford Music Trust. No name at all, because Vivian said single credits looked self-promotional for family events. By year 4, I was scoring 2 independent films a year under a production alias. Money that went straight into an account nobody in that house ever asked about because nobody in that house believed I made real money. I let them believe it. It was easier than watching Vivian's face try to compute a truth she'd already decided was impossible. Camille, meanwhile, was 24 and being called a prodigy at every dinner party in Fairfield County. I remember the night it curdled into something I couldn't swallow anymore. October, 3 years ago now, a private dinner at the house for the Wickhams, who'd just written the Foundation a 6-figure check. 14 people at a table meant for 12, candles burning low, the smell of the beeswax mixing with someone's cigar smoke from the terrace. Vivian stood at the head of the table with her glass raised. I want you all to hear this piece before the season announcement, she said. Camille wrote it herself. The Ashford Suite. I think it may be the finest thing this family has ever produced. She turned to Bill Wickham. My daughter is a true composer. Not many people understand what that costs, the discipline, the isolation. She locked herself away for months. Camille, to her credit, didn't say a word. She just looked at her wine glass like it had asked her a question she didn't have an answer to. I sat there and said nothing, because I had written the Ashford Suite in 11 days the previous spring, at 2 a.m, after evening rehearsals, at the desk in our guest room while Julian slept down the hall. Then Vivian looked past me toward the coat closet. Delphine, darling, would you mind getting Mrs. Wickham's wrap? It's turned cold on the terrace. Not a question. I stood, smoothed my dress, and walked to the closet like a woman who had misplaced her own spine somewhere between the pearls and the porch light. I told myself that was marriage. Absorb it, keep the peace, protect what Julian and I had built. I told myself silence was a kind of love. I went upstairs that night after the guests left, past 11, the house gone quiet except for the tick of the radiator. I sat down at my laptop to back up a session file before bed. Habit, nothing more, and there it was in the folder listing, plain as a receipt. Ashford Suite Val, _V3, Sib. Created 3 years, for months, and 11 days earlier. Long before Camille had supposedly locked herself away with her discipline and her isolation. I sat there in the blue light of the screen and did the math twice, the way you check a bank statement you don't want to believe. 3 years before Vivian's toast. 3 years before Camille's silence at the table. 3 years I had been quiet, and I made myself ask, plainly for the first time, quiet for whose sake? Julian's. Or his mother's pride, dressed up and handed to me as a marriage. The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter at 11 at night, 3 weeks after the Wickham dinner had stopped being a memory and started being a pattern I could name. Julian was still in his study. I could see the blue light of his laptop under the door. I picked up his phone by mistake, thinking it was mine. Same case, different year, and the screen was already lit with a spreadsheet he'd forgotten to close. Ashford Family Foundation. Q3 reconciliation. I should have set it down. I didn't. Operating reserve, $61,400. 6 months ago, it had been $340,000. There was a line item near the bottom, highlighted in pale yellow, that read Anonymous Donor, Restricted, Music Education. $187,000. Received in 4 transfers across 14 months. I knew that number. I knew it because I had wired it myself from an account under my maiden name, the one I used for film scoring residuals. Nobody at Ashford knew that account existed. Julian opened the door before I could set the phone back exactly where it had been. That's not, he started, then saw my face, and stopped pretending it was nothing. You weren't supposed to see the donor ledger. I wired that money, Julian.
He didn't argue.
That was the strange part. He just nodded, slowly, like a man confirming something he'd already decided not to ask about. I know, he said. I've known since the second transfer. I recognized the routing pattern. You never said anything. What was I going to say? Mother, the foundation's alive because your daughter-in-law is quietly funding it and doesn't want credit? He rubbed his eyes. She would have found a way to make that an insult, too. I set the phone down on the counter, screen dark now, and I didn't touch it again. 4 transfers. 14 months. $187,000 that came out of scoring work I did at 2 in the morning between rehearsals. Money nobody asked where it went, because nobody thought to ask if I had anywhere to put it but a cello case. When is the gala? I asked because I needed to be talking about something that wasn't this. Moved up, Julian said. 3 weeks out instead of spring. Eleanor Priss threatened to pull her pledge unless she saw, and I'm quoting, proof of life from the foundation before year end. Proof of life, I repeated. Mother's phrase, not mine. The next morning Vivian summoned me to the sunroom, which was her word for a meeting she wanted witnessed by good light. She had a folder open on the glass table, tabs color-coded, and she didn't look up when I sat down. You'll handle logistics for the anniversary program, she said. Seating charts, the printed booklet, coordinating with the venue on stage timing.
You're organized.
It's a compliment, Delphine, take it as one. And the performance program? Camille is debuting a new piece. I need you to have the cello tuned and staged for her. The good one, the Guadagnini replica, not the rehearsal instrument. She finally looked at me. You won't be performing. I wasn't asking to. I'm saying it, so there's no confusion later. This gala needs a certain. She searched for the word the way she always did when the true word was unkind, and she wanted a kinder one to wear it. Caliber.
Donors respond to a story.
Camille is the story. I thought about $187,000 sitting in a spreadsheet with my name nowhere on it. I said nothing. Vivian closed the folder with both hands, satisfied, and delivered the rest like she was reading a weather report. I'll be formally naming Camille as the foundation's successor that evening. Full transfer of the directorship. It felt right to do it publicly with the right people watching. The right people watching. Not us. Witnesses. Congratulations to her, I said, and my voice came out level, which surprised me more than it should have. I found Margaret in the archive room that afternoon, sleeves pushed up, cataloging a box of scores nobody else remembered existed. You still have the manuscripts, I said. Not a question. Every one, she said, not looking up from her index cards. Handwritten pages don't lie about whose hand wrote them, Delphine. I've kept them filed under my own name for 6 years. Nobody's ever asked to see box 17.
Why?
She looked at me then. Because someday somebody would need them to still exist. I didn't know what to do with that, so I thanked her and left, and the walk back to the house felt longer than it should have. That night Julian came to bed late, phone still in his hand, thumb scrolling. Sky said yes, he murmured, half to himself, half to me, not looking up. Mother's thrilled. Getting him is a coup, he doesn't do these things anymore.
Who?
Guest of honor. Some conductor Mother's been trying to book for 2 galas running. He was already asleep in his voice, the way he got when a name meant nothing to him but a checkbox on a list. Anatole something.
Sky.
I was still holding my own phone, unlocked, the donor ledger app open where I'd been transferring quarterly interest into the same account no one at that dinner table would ever think to trace back to me. I set it down. My hand wasn't steady when I did it. I called Sky from the parking lot outside a grocery store in Kent, because it was the only place I could think of where nobody from the Ashford world would walk past and hear my voice change. He picked up on the second ring. Delphine Marchetti. Not a question. He always said my full name like it was a fact worth stating out loud, the way you'd confirm a key signature.
Maestro.
I watched a woman load bagged ice into her trunk. I need a favor, and I need you to say no if it's a bad idea. You've never asked me for a favor in 9 years. A pause, papers shuffling somewhere in Vienna or Prague or wherever he'd landed that week. This must be good. I told him about the gala. Not everything, not yet, just that my husband's family ran a small classical music foundation in Connecticut, that they were having their anniversary event in 3 weeks, that he'd been invited as guest of honor. The Ashford Foundation, he said, and I heard him say it slowly, tasting it. Vivian Ashford's outfit. Yes, I accepted months ago. Small thing. Good publicity for them, I assumed. You're telling me this is your family. By marriage. 7 years. Silence on the line. Not confusion, recalculation. Sky didn't waste sound. Delphine, he said finally. The 4 pieces we recorded at Skywalker. The cello suites. Those went out under an arrangement credit. I never asked whose name was on the program because you asked me not to ask, and I respect an artist's reasons. But I want to understand something before I fly to Connecticut and shake anyone's hand. His voice dropped, careful now, the way he got before a downbeat. Whose name is on the program at this foundation? I stood there with my thumb pressed hard against the phone case. A car alarm chirped twice somewhere behind me. Camille Ashford's, I said. My sister-in-law. They call her a compositional genius. The line went quiet long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. The Ashford Suite, he said. I conducted the string arrangement myself 2 years ago, in Boston for a benefit. I was told it was written by a 20-something prodigy the family was very proud of. I remember thinking the voicing in the second movement was unusually mature for someone that young. Sophisticated grief in it. I told the program director as much. Another pause. You wrote that? Yes. You wrote all 4 of the studio pieces too? The ones under my name as producer? Yes. And they perform these? Under her name? At events you attend? Yes. I heard him exhale, slow, through his nose, a sound I recognized from 100 take-two moments when a phrase hadn't landed right, and he was deciding whether to stop the orchestra or let it ride. That is not a small thing, Delphine, he said. That is theft with a ribbon on it. I know what it is. My voice came out flatter than I meant it to. A man walked past with a shopping cart, while squeaking, and I turned my back to him out of some reflex I didn't examine. I'm not calling you to complain. I'm calling because I need to ask you not to say anything at the gala.
Please.
Just perform. Be gracious. Let it be an ordinary evening. I've been managing this a long time. I have a way of managing it. Have you? He didn't say it unkindly. He said it the way he corrected a bowing like a fact he was laying next to mine, so I could compare them. 14 years I've known you. You were 21 and terrified in a rehearsal room in Cleveland, and I told the concertmaster you'd be running your own ensemble before you were 30, and I was wrong only because you were too busy giving your work away to other people's names to run anything of your own.
A beat.
The world outside that house knows exactly who you are.
Frankfurt knows.
The Tanglewood board knows. I know. It seems only your husband's mother has managed to remain uninformed, and I find I am losing patience with her ignorance on your behalf. Anatole. I said his first name because I needed him to hear me as a person and not a principal.
Please. Not there.
Not like that. He didn't answer right away, and in the gap I could picture him exactly. Glasses pushed up into white hair, standing very still the way he did before he made a decision he wasn't going to unmake. I will be gracious, he said at last. I will smile for the photographs. I make no promise beyond that, Delphine, and I think you know me well enough not to ask me to. That was the whole of it.
No bow.
No handshake in a phone call. Just a conductor telling me, kindly, that he intended to conduct his own baton from here. Then, before I could find a way to end the call, he asked the question that put ice straight through the center of my chest. Tell me one thing, he said. The 4 scores from the studio sessions, your handwritten manuscripts, the ones with my marginal notes and yours. Do you still have the originals? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out for a second. Because I didn't have them. I hadn't had them in years. I'd handed every one of those manuscripts, page by page, into a gray archival box in the Ashford Foundation's basement, into Margaret Doyle's careful, waiting hands, long before I'd ever had a reason to think I might need them back. The Ashford Foundation's archive room smelled like binder dust and the cold breath of a dehumidifier running too hard for August. Margaret Doyle was already there when I came down the basement stairs, sitting at a folding table under a single hanging light, sorting programs from the 2019 season into a box. I wondered when you'd come, she said, without looking up. I stood in the doorway a moment. Renskei asked me something last night, whether I still had my manuscripts, the handwritten ones. Margaret set down the stack of programs. She had reading glasses pushed up into gray hair that hadn't changed style in the 6 years I'd known her, and she looked at me now the way she looked at a shelf that had come in slightly crooked, like something worth fixing properly instead of quickly. You gave them to me, she said. Every one. You remember that. I remember handing you a box. I assumed they went into general storage, filed under the Foundation's name, like everything else that comes through here. They didn't. She stood, wiped her palms on her cardigan, and walked to the far wall, where a bank of gray steel cabinets ran floor to ceiling. She stopped at the 3rd one from the end and pulled a ring of keys from her cardigan pocket. Not the master ring that hung by the stairs, a separate one, small and worn smooth. I filed them under my own name, Doyle, M. Personal reference materials. Nobody audits a librarian's reference shelf. The drawer rolled open with a sound like a held breath let go. Inside, standing upright in labeled folders, were manuscript pages, dozens of them, maybe more. The paper gone soft and slightly yellow at the edges the way paper does after real years, not staged ones. Camille submits typeset copies to the board, Margaret said. Engraved, printed, clean. Nobody's handwriting on them at all. But you never gave me those. You gave me these. She lifted one folder out and set it on the table under the light, and stepped back so I could look. I knew the page before I fully saw it. 3rd movement, Ashford Suite, bar 41, where I'd crossed out a bowing mark and rewritten it twice because the first 2 hadn't sounded right in my head at 2 a.m. My handwriting, small and slanted left, the way my mother taught me before she died. A coffee ring in the upper corner from a mug I still owned. A date in the corner in my own hand, March 4 years ago. I know your hand from 6 years of receiving your parts, Margaret said quietly. I know Camille's hand, too. She writes fine, decorative letters, like she's still being graded on penmanship. She has never once, in all the years I have processed submissions for this foundation, turned in a working draft. Only finished ones. That should have told everyone something long before now. I ran a finger along the edge of the page, without touching the ink. Why did you keep them separate? Under your own name? Sit down a second, Margaret said, and pulled out the folding chair beside her own.
Isette.
She stayed standing, arms crossed, like she needed the height to say it. 11 years ago, I flagged a discrepancy in a grant report. Inflated attendance numbers for the youth strings program, numbers that didn't match the sign-in sheets I kept myself. I took it to the board treasurer instead of to Vivian directly. Her jaw tightened. The vote to remove me for it failed by one. One vote, Delphine. I've never once believed she stopped wanting it to pass. So, you started keeping your own records. I started keeping proof. I've watched what's happened to you for years without anything to hold up against it. Now I have something. She looked at me steadily. I wasn't going to store proof somewhere she could find it. Something in my chest that had been braced for a long time loosened, just slightly, at the word proof. I hadn't asked her to think of it that way. She'd already decided, on her own, years before I knew I'd need it. There's something else. Margaret's tone shifted, quicker now, edged with worry. She pulled a small spiral notepad from her cardigan pocket. Last Thursday, I was in the hallway outside Vivian's office, waiting on a signature for the catering invoice, and I heard her on the phone. She flipped it open and read from her own neat handwriting. I want the archive cleared before the gala. Anything that isn't final copy. I don't care what it takes. I didn't know who she was talking to, but I moved your folder that same afternoon into a drawer I don't log. Are they all here? I asked, looking back at the drawer, at the folders lined up like a spine holding something upright. Margaret didn't answer right away. She was already moving, pulling the drawer wider, running her fingers along the folder tabs, checking each one against some private count in her head. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. They should be, she said. 4 of the major ones, the full scores, the ones Rinsky recorded, those I kept in the bottom drawer in a separate lockbox inside the cabinet. I check it every Monday. She crouched, pulled the bottom drawer open, and went still. The lockbox was there. It was open. Empty. Margaret, I said, and my voice came out smaller than I meant it to. She didn't answer. She was staring at something on top of the box, a small torn scrap of notepaper, folded once, weighted down by nothing but its own stillness. She picked it up with 2 fingers, like it might still be warm, and unfolded it under the light, so we could both read the handwriting neither of us needed a folder to recognize.
Took them.
Don't worry. Camille's signature sat underneath, small and looping, the same decorative hand that had never once, in 6 years of submissions, drafted a single working page. When did you last check this box? I asked. Monday, Margaret said. It was locked Monday. I have the only key besides the master, and the master hasn't left the front desk drawer since June. She turned the scrap over, as if the back might explain something the front hadn't. She had to have used the master, or someone gave it to her. I thought of Vivian's voice on the phone Thursday. I don't care what it takes. I thought of Camille, 29 years old, standing in front of a room full of donors next spring accepting credit for 4 scores she couldn't have written a single bar of, and now holding the only proof that could take that credit away from her. Don't worry, I said aloud, reading Camille's own words back into the empty room. That's what she wrote. Margaret looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked frightened.
Delphine.
Whatever she's doing with those, we need to know before the gala. Not after. I folded the scrap of paper once more along its own crease and put it in my pocket, because it was mine now, whatever else was gone. I found Camille's Range Rover still in the garage, engine ticking as it cooled. She hadn't gone anywhere. She was sitting on the back porch steps in the dark, still in her rehearsal clothes, a duffel bag zipped shut beside her feet. Where are they? I said. She didn't look up. Where are what? Don't. I sat down on the step below her, close enough to see her hands shaking around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking. Margaret found the note. Your handwriting.
For scores, Camille.
The Rinsky sessions. Where are they? I didn't burn them. Her voice cracked on the word burn, like she'd rehearsed not saying it and failed. You think I burned them? I think your mother told you to make evidence disappear before 300 people watch her crown you tomorrow night. She doesn't know I have them. Camille finally looked at me, and her eyes were red in a way makeup hadn't fixed. Nobody knows. I took them Thursday, before Margaret even noticed the lock. I've had them in my car for 6 days. I stared at the duffel bag. My stomach did something slow and cold. Give them to me. I can't. Camille. I said I can't. She stood up so fast the mug tipped, tea running dark across the wood in a thin line toward my shoe. Do you know what happens if those go up on a screen tomorrow? Do you know what happens to me? The truth happens to you. The truth is I haven't written a single usable bar in 4 years. She said it flat, fast, like ripping tape off skin. Not one. Every piece with my name on it since the Ashford suite is yours, and I know it, and I sit in that rehearsal room every week terrified someone's going to ask me to explain a modulation I didn't write, and I can't, Delphine, I can't, because there's nothing there. I checked. I checked so many times I stopped believing there'd ever be something there. I opened my mouth and nothing came out for a second. This wasn't the woman who'd smiled over champagne while her mother called me a girl who saw strings for tips. This was someone who'd been drowning quietly in a room full of people cheering for how well she swam. So, you kept the scores, I said slowly. Not to destroy them. To keep the lie alive one more night. I kept them because if they disappear tomorrow, so do I. Her voice dropped. I don't know how to be anyone else. Mom built this person and put my name on the door, and I walked in because it was easier than telling her I was ordinary. The porch light caught the duffel's zipper, and for 1 second I thought I could just take it. She was smaller than me, tired, off balance. I could grab the bag and walk. I didn't move. Some old habit of restraint held my hands still even now. Then hand them to me, and I'll do what I should have done years ago. I kept my voice level, though something under my ribs was climbing. Tell the truth quietly. Correct the record. Nobody has to burn for it, Camille.
Not even you. Delphine.
Julian's voice, behind me, low and hard. I turned. He was standing in the doorway in his shirt sleeves, and from his face I understood he'd heard more than the last line. You've been out here interrogating my sister the night before the gala. It wasn't a question. She has the original scores, Julian. She took them from the archive. I need them back before tomorrow or none of this. Stop. He came down 2 steps, and something in the set of his jaw looked exactly like his mother's. I don't care whose handwriting is on what right now. I care that in 18 hours my mother is standing in front of 300 donors and the board that decides whether this foundation survives, and you're choosing tonight, of all nights, to blow it apart. I'm not choosing anything. I'm trying to stop a lie before it gets bigger. A lie that's kept this family's name intact for 30 years. His voice rose, then caught itself, dropped again, worse for the control in it. Whatever you think you're owed, Delphine, don't do this tomorrow. Don't destroy your own family to prove a point. My own family. I heard it and said nothing because there was nothing small enough to say that wouldn't become something large. Camille had already picked up the duffel bag. She didn't look at either of us. She went inside through the kitchen door, and I heard the deadbolt turn a moment later, an ordinary sound, absurdly loud in the quiet. Julian didn't apologize. He just stood there a moment longer, like a man who'd said what needed saying, then went back inside too, leaving me alone on the steps with a cold puddle of tea drying near my shoe, and for scores I no longer had. I called Rinsky twice more that night. Both times it went straight to voicemail, his outgoing message in that unmistakable Krakow accent, clipped and unhelpful. By 11 I gave up and just sat with the phone in my lap, watching the screen go dark and light again each time I touched it, as if enough tries could make him pick up. I sat in the guest room we'd been using since the renovation, still in my rehearsal dress, and made myself say it once, plainly. I had lost. The scores were gone. My one witness wasn't answering. Tomorrow Vivian would hand my life's work to her daughter in front of everyone I respected, and I would stand there and clap, because that was apparently still what I did. My phone lit up on the nightstand, one soft chime in the dark. An unknown number. 2 words. I know. 2 words, glowing on the screen of a phone I didn't recognize. I stood there in the sunroom doorway a full 10 seconds before I typed back 1 word. Who is this? No answer came. I put the phone in my clutch and went to dress for the gala. The Ashford Foundation's 20-year anniversary was held in the ballroom of the Hartwell Club. 3 chandeliers, 300 chairs upholstered in cream silk, and a stage banked with white peonies that cost more than my first cello. I know because I'd approved the florist's invoice myself. From the folding table backstage, where I'd spent the last 4 hours being useful in the way Vivian preferred. Invisible. Delphine, the string quartet needs their stands moved 8 inches left. They're blocking the sight line to the podium. Vivian said it without looking at me, her eyes on a mirror held by her makeup artist. She wore emerald silk and the Ashford pearls, the ones that came out only for donors with 7 figures. "I'll handle it," I said. I handled it. I handled the seating chart when Eleanor Priss's assistant called twice about a broken heel and a vegetarian entree. I handled the sound check, standing in the wings in a black dress that nobody would remember, while the quartet ran 16 bars of Vivaldi and a stagehand argued with a lighting tech about a gel that was too blue. Nobody introduced me to anyone. A donor's wife asked me to refill her water glass. I did that too. At 8, the doors opened and 300 people walked into a room built to make them feel important, and it worked. I watched from behind a velvet curtain as Julian worked the crowd in his father's old tuxedo, laughing at a joke Bill Whitcomb told for what must have been the 4th time that decade. Camille stood near the stage in ivory, a folder of sheet music pressed to her chest like something she was afraid would be taken from her.
She didn't look at me.
I knew that folder. I knew the paper stock, slightly heavier than standard, the kind I ordered from a shop in Kent because the fibers held up under an eraser. I knew what was inside it because I had written every note of it in April. At 2 a.m. in the second bedroom Vivian called my practice room, as though I needed the euphemism explained to me. Vivian took the podium at 8:40. The room quieted the way rooms do for people who've never had to ask twice. 20 years ago, she said, my husband and I founded this organization on a single belief, that talent, real talent, deserves a stage. Applause, warm and practiced. Tonight, I want to talk about the future of that belief. She turned, found Camille in the crowd, and extended a hand toward her like a magician revealing the trick. My daughter. More applause. I refilled a glass of water 3 feet from the stage, and nobody looked at my face. Camille has spent this past year composing what I believe is the finest work this foundation has ever produced. Tonight, she'll perform it for you herself. And afterward, Vivian smiled, and I watched 300 people lean in. I'll be formally naming her as my successor, as the future of the Ashford Foundation. The applause this time had a shape to it, rising expectant. Vivian let it crest, then raised her champagne flute, and her eyes finally found mine across the room. Before she plays, Vivian said, I want to acknowledge someone else. My daughter-in-law. A small laugh moved through the crowd already, anticipating her tone before her words arrived. Delphine has been such a help tonight with the logistics. She has quite a talent, actually, for sawing away at strings for tips, back when we found her. Laughter, real laughter, glasses lifting. We're all so glad she found a better home. I did not set down the water pitcher. I did not look away from her. I stood in my black dress in a room full of people laughing at a joke about my life's work, and I felt the pitcher's handle, cold and slightly damp, in my palm, and I said nothing at all. Vivian turned and lifted a leather portfolio case from the podium shelf, the Ashford case, the one that had held the Foundation's founding charter for 2 decades, and pressed it into Camille's arms. The future, she said, starts tonight. Camille climbed the 3 steps to the stage slower than the moment required. She opened her folder at the piano bench, and for 1 second, before she lifted her bow, her eyes crossed the room and landed on me. Her hand trembled on the page. She didn't move. I remembered the last time I'd seen her hands shake like that. 3 years ago, in the Wickham's dining room, she'd knocked over a wine glass rather than answer a question about her process, and Vivian had laughed it off as artistic nerves. I'd covered for her that night, too, the way I covered for everything. I watched her now and thought, this is what it costs her, standing up there in my music. I wondered if anyone else in the room could see it, or if I was the only one who knew what trembling hands over that particular folder meant. Vivian noticed the pause and covered it smoothly. And to lend this evening the credibility it deserves, she said, turning to the front row, I'd like to invite our guest of honor to say a few words.
Maestro Anatole Rensky.
Rensky rose from his chair unhurried, buttoning his jacket, and made his way to the podium with the gait of a man who had never once needed to walk quickly for anyone. He took the microphone from Vivian's hand, adjusted it a half-inch, and let his eyes travel across the entire room, slowly, deliberately, until they reached me at the water pitcher. I had worked with him for 4 years by then, for recordings, hundreds of hours in a booth at Skywalker Sound where he called me the only honest musician in this business, and meant it as the highest compliment he owned. He had no idea whose family this was. He had flown in from Vienna for a favor to a foundation whose name meant nothing to him beyond a check and a plaque. I watched him find my face and go still, the way he did in the booth when a take was wrong, and he was deciding whether to say so. Before I congratulate anyone, he said, I need to correct something the music world has misunderstood for a great many years. The room did not gasp. It went quieter than that, the way a concert hall goes quiet when the conductor's hand finally lifts. 4 years ago, Rensky said, I recorded 4 works at Skywalker Sound with a cellist and composer whose name has never once appeared on an Ashford Foundation program. He let that sit. Somewhere behind me a champagne glass touched a table too hard. The works became this foundation's calling card. The composer was called, tonight, by another name. I would like the record corrected, in front of the people who wrote checks believing that name was true. Vivian's smile was still on her face. It just wasn't attached to anything anymore. Anatole, she said, light wrong. I think there's some confusion. There is no confusion. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He'd spent 50 years learning how to be heard by 200 people without shouting at any of them. Could someone bring up the projection screen? Margaret Doyle has the files. I hadn't seen Margaret cross the room. She was already at the AV table near the bar, laptop open, cardigan buttoned wrong on purpose or by accident, I never asked. She told me once, in the archive, that she scanned everything twice, once for the record, once for the day the record went missing. I hadn't understood at the time that she meant this exact night. The screen behind the podium, 10 meters of white, meant for donor thank yous and a slideshow of children at the Foundation's summer program, filled instead with a photograph of a manuscript page. My handwriting. Cello line bracketed in pencil, a note in the margin that said too sweet here, cut the vibrato, and beneath it, in my own scrawl, a date. March 4 years ago. I knew that page. I'd written that note at my kitchen table at 11 at night with Julian asleep upstairs, 3 years before anyone in this room ever said the words Ashford Sweet out loud at a dinner and sent me for a coat. Next page, Rensky said, and Margaret clicked, and the second work came up, and the third, my ink getting messier as the pile went on, a coffee ring on the fourth, crossouts, a phone number scrawled in the corner that I recognized as the number for the Kent Pharmacy, because I'd written it while on hold with them about a prescription and hadn't wanted to lose the bar I was working out in my head. Nobody in that room needed to be a musician to read it.
It was not a copy of something.
It was the making of something caught mid-thought, the way a diary is not a summary of a life. I heard Camille's chair before I saw her move. She stood with the score she'd carried up to the podium still in her hands, the same pages, printed clean, her name typed at the top in a font that had never once been crossed out or coffee-stained or corrected at 11 at night. She looked at the screen. She looked at the page in her hands. She set it down on the podium's edge, and her hands were shaking badly enough that it slid, and she had to catch it before it went to the floor. I didn't write it, she said. The microphone caught it before she meant it to, amplified across the room, and she flinched at the sound of her own voice coming back at her twice. I never wrote any of it. Delphine did. All 4. I don't know how to write what she writes. I never have. Somewhere near the back a woman said, quietly, not quietly enough, oh my God, and I watched the word travel through the tables like something spilled. I felt the chair beside me push back before I understood what was happening. Julian stood. He didn't look at his mother. He came around the table and stood next to me, close enough that his shoulder was against mine, and he took my hand in front of 200 people who had spent 7 years watching him defer to Vivian on where to sit, what to say, which name went on the program. He didn't say anything.
He didn't need to.
It was the first time in our marriage he had chosen where to stand before he found out which side was winning. Vivian's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it for the first time in the 7 years I had known her. I want to say, I felt triumph. What I felt was closer to what you feel watching a building you used to live in come down, the specific vertigo of a thing being true after years of being told it wasn't, your own eyes finally allowed to agree with your own memory. My hands, I noticed, were folded in front of me exactly the way Vivian had taught me to stand at these events. Still useful, apparently, in the wreckage. Behind me, 2 men in tuxedos had their heads bent together over a phone, and I caught fragments, reserve fund, 61,000, down from 340, the kind of number that meant nothing to most of the room, and everything to the two of them. I didn't know yet how those numbers would surface publicly, only that they were already loose in the room, moving table to table the way the truth about Camille had just moved, and that somewhere on that phone was a figure, $187,000, for transfers, 14 months, that no one in this room had been told about either. Eleanor Priss stood up. I knew her by the seating chart, not by sight. Front table. The donor Vivian had rescheduled an entire anniversary gala 3 weeks earlier to keep from walking away. She was maybe 60, in a blue suit, and she did not raise her voice either, but she didn't need the microphone for the room to hear her. Vivian. She said the name like a question that had already been answered, and she just wanted it confirmed out loud. The $1,100,000 my foundation has given the Ashford Foundation over 6 years, every gala, every annual letter, every plaque with a name on it. I'd like to know exactly whose work we were told we were funding, and whose it actually was. I didn't answer it there. Not in front of 300 people and a photographer who'd started shooting again. Julian stepped down off the stage before I could reach him, and Vivian caught his sleeve at the bottom step. I heard her voice go low and fast, the register she used when she wanted words to disappear before anyone else could hear them. You will fix this, she said. Tonight. Before the board meets. There's nothing to fix, Mother, Julian said. There's only what's true. I left them there and walked toward the coat check, past the string quartet packing up their stands, past 2 board members already murmuring into their phones. My hands were shaking. I hadn't noticed until I tried to find my ticket stub in my clutch and couldn't grip it properly. Camille was waiting by the coat rack, a leather portfolio pressed flat against her chest like it might stop her heart from pounding through it. When she saw me, she didn't wait for me to speak. These are yours, she said, and held out the portfolio. All 4. The originals. I opened it there under the bad fluorescent light of the coat check hallway. My own handwriting looked back at me. The pencil marks I'd made in the sunroom at 2 a.m, the coffee ring on the 3rd page I remembered making myself. 4 scores. 6 days she'd kept them in her car. She told me later, driving around Litchfield County with them on the passenger seat like she couldn't decide whether to burn them or return them. I never wrote a note of it, Camille said. Her voice had none of the polish it had on stage 2 years ago, the night she'd taken a bow for a piece I'd dated in pencil in March. For years ago, and never signed. Mom started telling people I was gifted when I was 9. I believed her for a long time. Then I stopped believing her, and I still didn't say anything, because saying something meant admitting I'd let it happen for 20 years. I know what that costs, I said. I've been paying it for 7. She flinched at that. At the marriage, the whole shape of it, laid out in one sentence. What do you want? She asked.
Now.
What do you actually want? Because I don't think it's her chair. I want my name on the pieces, I said. I want a scholarship fund, real one, for kids who can't afford lessons, kids like I was before Anatole found me. I don't want to run anything. I never wanted to run anything. Camille nodded, slow, like she was memorizing it for later use. Then Margaret Doyle appeared at the end of the hallway, still in her cardigan from the archive, out of breath like she'd walked fast to catch us. I kept them, Margaret said, before I could ask why she was there at all, at a gala she had no reason to attend. Every manuscript you ever brought me to file, going back 3 years. I logged the real dates. I never let Vivian near the original folders, told her the archive checks were on Mondays, told her the master copies were with a framer. I knew this day would come. She looked, for a second, like she might cry, and didn't. Someone had to keep the truth somewhere she couldn't reach it. I didn't have room to feel that yet. I filed it the way I file everything for later, for when there's air to breathe it in, because Eleanor Priss's assistant was already crossing the lobby toward us, phone in hand. "The board wants a call at 9 a.m. Monday," she said to me, not to Camille. "Mrs. Priss asked me to tell you first. 9 years of donations, $1.1 million over 6 years from the Priss name alone, and it had taken 4 minutes on a stage to put all of it in motion against Vivian instead of for her." I found Julian near the exit, tie loosened, jacket over his arm. He looked 10 years younger than he had an hour ago and 10 years older than he had at our wedding 7 years ago, both at once, in a way I didn't try to explain to myself. "I should have told her myself," he said. "Not let you carry it alone for 14 months. "You told her tonight," I said. "That's more than I expected from you 3 years ago, at your parents' dinner table, when you let her say what she said about my playing and didn't stop her." He didn't defend himself. That, more than anything he'd said on stage, was how I knew something had actually changed. We walked out through the side doors together, past the valet stand, into air that smelled like cut grass and somebody's cigarette. The gala noise behind us dropped to a murmur, then almost nothing. "Delphine." Vivian's voice, from the doorway, pitched to carry the way she'd trained it to carry over string sections for 40 years. I stopped walking. Julian's hand found the small of my back, steady, and didn't push me either direction. "What do you think you're going to do with my foundation?" Vivian called after me. I stood there in the dark of the parking lot, 3 weeks earlier than any of us had planned for this night to happen, and I didn't turn around. Julian's hand found the small of my back. Vivian looked at it the way she used to look at unpaid invoices. "A scholarship," she repeated, like the word cost her something to say. "Named Marchetti," I said. "Not Ashford." She didn't say anything else. She got into the town car Bill Wickham had waiting, and the door shut with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence, and that was the last full conversation I ever had with her. 4 months later, I was standing backstage at the Litchfield Performing Arts Center, listening to an audience settle into their seats, and Camille was next to me holding a folder of parts she'd copied by hand. "I checked the bowings twice," she said. "I know I'm not. I know these aren't mine to fix. I just wanted them right." "They're right," I said, and I meant it about more than the bowings. We'd spent 3 months in the sunroom at her place in Kent, not the Ashford house, going through what she actually wanted to write instead of what she'd been told to want. Small things at first. A 4-bar phrase for solo viola that she showed me with her shoulders already braced for correction. It wasn't brilliant. It was hers, which was worth more to me than brilliant had ever been. "Margaret sent the archive inventory," Camille said. "Final version. Your name's on every score now. All 4, plus the 11 arrangements before that." "All 11? "All 11. She almost smiled. She made me proofread it myself. Said if I was going to learn anything from this, I could start with a red pen. That sounded exactly like Margaret, who had gone from Foundation Archivist to the board's newly appointed Director of Artistic Integrity, a title she'd insisted on writing herself, 3 days after the vote to remove Vivian passed by one margin nobody argued about twice. Julian found us both in the corridor, still holding 2 coffees he'd forgotten to hand out. He gave one to Camille, without being asked. "You came early," Camille said, surprised. "I came to hear it," Julian said. "Both of you, actually. I owe you that much for every dinner I sat through and said nothing." Camille looked at her cup instead of at him. "You don't owe me an apology, Julian. You owe me, I don't know, showing up next time before it costs someone else something." "I'm working on it," he said, and for the first time since I'd known him, his sister let him hug her without going stiff first. Backstage, Anatole found us both with a baton already tucked under his arm like an extension of his hand. 71 years old, and he still walked into a hall like the walls owed him rent. "Marchetti Fund inaugural concert," he said. "You realize I have conducted in Vienna, in Tokyo, in a cathedral in Krakow that smelled like 1,000 years of candle smoke. I have never once been this nervous." "You're not nervous." "No," he agreed. "But you should be. Your name is on the program in 18-point type. Front page. Above the title. I looked at the program in his hand. Delphine Marchetti Ashford. It read, composer. Beneath it, in smaller print, the Marchetti Scholarship for Young Musicians, first class of 12 students, ages 9 to 16, full tuition, instrument, and lessons covered for 4 years. 12 kids. I'd read their names in the acceptance letters Margaret had helped me draft. One of them, a girl named Priya, had written in her application essay that she practiced in a stairwell because her apartment was too small for a cello to fit anywhere else. Julian came to find me before the house lights dropped, still in the gray suit he'd worn to testify in front of the board 2 weeks earlier, still looking like a man who'd spent a year learning to stand somewhere and was still getting used to his own footing. I used to think keeping the peace meant not saying anything, he said. I'm learning that's not the same as peace. It's just quiet. I know, I said. I spent 7 years learning that too. He didn't apologize again. He'd done that already more than once, and I'd stopped needing to hear it on repeat. He just took my hand, and we stood in the wings together while the house lights went down, and Anatole raised his baton, and the opening bars of the piece I'd written at 2 in the morning 4 years ago, alone, unnamed, unclaimed, finally filled a room with my name already printed at the top of it. I used to believe silence was the price of love. It isn't. It's just a debt you keep paying to someone who never asked what it was costing you.